it's fine. If it's not, then.
And what's the difference between prebiotics and probiotics?
Prebiotics are the food for probiotics, basically.
How do you wash this? Do you suggest just a hand rub?
I just rinse it.
Or just rinse it?
As long as they're organic vegetables, yeah, I just
Yeah.
rinse it. I don't scrub it. Very much so.
Some of them have quite a lot of dirt that needs to be scrubbed off, but that's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah. There's probiotics in the dirt. There used to be a lot more probiotics in our soil. But with industrialized agriculture, we've killed quite a few of them, so I tend to like it all.
So do you prefer them using the salt over the whey?
I do.
And so why would people use the whey? What would be the benefit of that? Is there or?
Yeah, so when I like the chutney recipes, I tend to use whey in the chutney recipes because they're fruit ferments, and so salty fruit is an acquired taste, and so I tend to use half as much salt and replace it with whey. So I use salt and whey, just because the flavor to me is better. Because sweet and salty works sometimes, but some of those it's a little bit too overpowering if you use the amount of salt that you need. In order for it to ferment quickly. Yeah. Good question.
And that whey is dairy?
It is.
It is.
Yeah.
Oh, and what do you mean then by a fruit ferment?
So in the chutney recipes in there, you basically, I think of it like the ginger date chutney recipe. And so a fruit ferment, you're fermenting the sugars in the dates. So just like in the, so there's a lot of starches that are in vegetables, and that's basically what the bacteria are breaking down and eating. It's kind of like the prebiotics that they're breaking down and eating in order to grow the beneficial bacteria. So the sugars in the fruit is what the beneficial bacteria break down in order to grow that. And so you could do it with just salt, because that will create an environment where those bacteria thrive, where the probiotics thrive, and where any harmful bacteria will die because they'll get outcompeted and there's nowhere for them to live. Or you can add a little bit of whey to that and allow that process to happen without the flavor. And I just tend to like wild fermentation over starter cultures. So kefir grains, whey, kombucha, all of those are kind of like considered like starter cultures. They're not wild because you have something that is going to give you a very specific set of probiotics. Whereas in fermented vegetables, you'll get whatever's on those vegetables. And so that's why it can be useful, because you get a lot of diversity. And diversity is really important in the process.
So I'm just curious, like, let's say cilantro.
Yeah.
You know, it has a lot of benefits for diabetes. If you were to ferment that, does it even bring out those properties even more, or is this basically more just sort of the probiotics that would be in that plant or in that food?
Yeah, so I don't know specifically about cilantro, but I do know with a lot of other green leafy vegetables that are really high in B vitamins, the bacteria actually unlock those B vitamins and make them more absorbable for the system. So using that theory, it's possible that the same thing would happen with cilantro, but I haven't seen any specific research showing what particular vitamins and minerals the bacteria are unlocked. But in general, I mean, this kind of brings me to the next thing that I was wanting to talk about, is that we perceive ourselves as being one thing, but the probiotics or the bacteria in our body outnumber our cells 10 to 1. So although you think you are, all your cells, there's actually 10 times more bacteria living on and in you and with you than there are your own human cells. And the reason that is because the human genome, our gene code, our DNA, is extremely slow to change, just like prehistorically slow. We have a really hard time adapting to new environments because our gene code is huge. Bacteria, it can change like in a blink of an eye. And so the human body has recognized that benefit of being a host to all those bacteria, because otherwise we would just become extinct because we change too slowly. We don't know how to adapt. And so we've learned our adaptation strategy has actually been to allow all these bacteria, 10 times as many as we have human cells, to cohabitate with us. And so they have a huge number of benefits that they provide to the system. So I have like a little list here, and I'll just read it off to you because I don't want to miss anything. So primary is helping the body resist pathogens. So the little table in here, you'll see the strains of bacteria that help you fight infections. Some of them, they've even found like AIDS, HIV prevention, certain strains of bacteria. They manufacture neurotransmitters, serotonin, and they help to manufacture the B vitamins, like I was mentioning with the green leafy vegetables, and vitamin K. Manufacturing essential nutrients like short-chain fatty acids. So how many people are on essential fatty acids or fish oils? It's the bacteria that are actually breaking those down and making those useful for the body. So you could be taking a huge dose of fish oils and not getting any benefit because you might not have the probiotics that actually break those down and make those utilizable for the system because you're a team. You need probiotics. So yeah, assisting signaling molecules for the immune and metabolic system. So one of those is it's actually the probiotics that signal whether we're satiated. So if you eat, and you keep eating because you never get the satiation signals, that's because you have a low amount of probiotics mainly in the small intestine. There's not very many probiotics in the stomach. So you don't ever get those satiation signals. And then they also help regulate our stress levels and temperament. But you've probably heard about this. It's definitely related to manufacturing serotonin. But they say that 80 to 90% of our neurotransmitters, which basically determine our mood and the function of our mind, are contained in our gut, and contained in our gastrointestinal tract. And so that's why a lot of people will kind of talk in a way that associates their gut with their mind. Felt it in my belly, or that sort of thing, because they really are interchangeable. And so if you find yourself being irritable or judgmental or anything else, that could be the key, is actually supporting the digestive system and supporting the gut. So those are like some of the benefits, and there's a lot of different benefits within the system. So,
Hey, actually,
yeah.
I caught something in lifting weights. You said it's absorbable. As far as proteins, what unlocks for your body to be more absorbable for protein?
Yeah, miso is specific to protein assimilation and absorption. So because there's a lot of different types of probiotics there.
Well, I ask because GNC and all the supplements that people buy, it's just exploding right now, and people are putting fillers in there.
Yeah.
And just because it says 30 grams,
Doesn't mean
it's not, you're not absorbing it. Like
Right.
a chicken breast is 30 grams, you might absorb 30%.
Right, exactly.
From what I understand. But,
Yeah.
I just didn't know what maybe an ingredient or vitamin you can take to make it
Yeah.
more.
So miso is a fermented bean paste. It's usually soy, although in the back of the handout I have some references for different places to buy miso. And the top one is South River, and they make a dookie, a chickpea, and a millet miso, all of which are gluten and soy free for people who are trying to avoid gluten and soy. The co-op doesn't carry it, but if you all call in tomorrow and say, hey, you should carry South River miso, that would be great for me, because then I wouldn't have to mail it. It's like $50 to ship it. Carolina, North Carolina, wherever they're at. So miso is great for protein absorption. And then also, all the vegetable ferments are just going to assist that absorption process. And I'll probably mention this a few times, but I'll mention it now because I think it's important information. So in order to kind of recolonize the gut with vegetable fermentation, you need to be eating 1 to 2 tablespoons 3 times a day for 30 days
Of what?
Of what?
of fermented vegetables.
Is that, your claims process has that in it, right?
It does, yeah, we use that
Would you say that again, 1 to 2 tablespoons 3 times a day?
3 times a day for 30 days.
In order to do what?
In order to recolonize the beneficial bacteria in your intestines.
I was feeling like that was a lot of salt. I mean, I did it and I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I was wondering about the salt.
Yeah. It is a fair amount of salt because that's the environment that they grow in. And it really depends on whether you're making your own crop or whether you're purchasing your crop. Because you can vary the salt that you use, it just takes longer for it to ferment. So that was something that I failed to mention in terms of the fermentation process. But those are in those instructions for those different types of vegetable ferments, is that it takes about 2 to 4 days for everything to ferment. And after 2 to 4 days at about 72 degrees, everything is pretty much fermented, but then you want those bacteria to continue to proliferate and colonize and grow. And so what I usually recommend is then taking that and putting it in a cool, dark place. I tend to put it in my refrigerator, because then those beneficial bacteria can continue to grow. And so they usually will recommend that after that 2 to 4 day process at 72 degrees, then you leave it in the refrigerator for 1 to 2 weeks, because then the concentration of probiotics is much, much higher than if you were just to eat it straight away. You can, there's no harm in it, and actually over time, the flavors change quite a bit, and the salt, the way that the salt kind of draws the moisture out of the vegetables, it gets more crispy over time too, and I think has a nicer texture.
So if you're on a low sodium diet and you finish your fermentation, you rinse it out, you rinse out all the bacteria too.
Yeah, if you're on a low sodium diet, then I would recommend fermenting with whey. With whey.
Wait,
So how long does it last? So you leave it in the fridge for like 1 to 2 weeks?
Yeah.
Then you start eating it.
Yeah,
So how long does it last?
decades.
Oh, it lasts forever, as long as it's refrigerated.
Pretty much the vegetable ferments will last a really long time. The fermentation process is continuing to happen over time. So the vegetables will continue to degrade and continue to get broken down because they're getting eaten by the beneficial bacteria. So there may come a time where, this has happened to me actually when I over-salted some of the fermented vegetables that I was making, where over time it actually got kind of mushy, and to my palate it was gross, and so I couldn't eat it, and I ended up just putting it in like a carrot soup that I was making. That was like a blended carrot soup, because I didn't notice it, and figured out it's good for me. But yeah, so I mean, they'll continue to break down. They're pretty much, the fruit ferments, on the other hand, about 2 months, just because the way that sugar ferments as opposed to starch, they ferment more quickly and can break down more quickly, and so the fruit ferments can turn into vinegar or alcohol after about 2 months, where the other ones, the vegetable ones, will really. Yeah, that's a great question.
In regards to salt,
Yeah.
is there a difference between Himalayan not salt and sea salt? I assume you use one of those.
Yeah. I haven't noticed a big difference. I've tried both of those, and I think just as long as it's a good quality salt. I think that's the
Minerals, I mean, isn't there more minerals in Himalayan milk than sea?
there is.
So would that make a difference?
Yeah, I mean the probiotics improve mineral absorption, and so you'll probably be getting more of those minerals. There's tons of minerals in all of your vegetables, but you may not absorb all of them, so it'll improve the mineral absorption process. But I haven't noticed it.
Which do you use?
I tend to use the Himalayan salt more often, but I've used both.
well, if I don't make my own and I'll buy Blissful Planet,
Yes.
should I look at the date and kind of wait a few weeks to eat it, something like that?
You know, I don't know how Blissful Planet does it. I would assume, I mean, the guy who owns it is extremely well educated about probiotics. So my assumption is that they probably don't bottle it until it's already sat for those 2 weeks. and then they put it on the shelves with an expiration date. Just knowing him and knowing how stellar he is and how on it he is, that would be my assumption, but I can't be sure about that without testing it. So I would think it's fine.
It's called Pickle Planet. It's a local company that makes Pickle Planet.
Yeah,
And they have a variety and they're yummy.
they are. He makes some really good stuff.
Is there any kind of fermentation that breaks down the harmful chemicals that are in nightshade plants, like potatoes, tomatoes, eggplant, and things like that? So that you can still consume those things and it wouldn't harm you as much?
Yeah, I know there are a significant number of ferments, especially that have like come out of Italy, that are eggplant and tomato based, like tomato relishes and other stuff like that. I don't know specifically if they improve the absorption. Normally it's kind of the nitrates in those, and so I can't be sure about that. I haven't come across that, but it would make sense to me. Yeah.
What's the comparison of the wet sea salt to the salts?
Say that again?
The wet sea salt, you know, the sea salt that's spilled really wet,
Oh yeah.
is that better or the same?
I think it's the same. Yeah, I think the wet sea salt tends to have gone through less processing, so that anytime you process something more, it usually is taking away something. So I would think that the wet is the better quality sea salt, but in terms of fermentation, you know, salt is really just there to create the environment for, primarily for the lactobacillus to grow, because they like the lactic acid environment that's created.
Well, about the nightshade veggies, so, but you were talking about digestive properties and its ability to be digested. However, what we don't want is for it to get into the body because it adds to inflammation. Is that what you were talking about?
Maybe I misspoke. I meant in terms of the beneficial bacteria digesting that, like pre-digesting it, so that it's not, so
then,
we don't have to digest it.
okay, so you're saying then we would eat fermented veggies with bell peppers, eggplants, potatoes, and tomatoes. And then it would prevent it from causing as much inflammation.
Oh, no, I'm saying that I don't know enough about that subject to be able to speak to it.
Well, besides nightshade plants, I presume that people know things like poison oak and poison ivy, for instance, are not in the nightshade family, that they are harmful, but they are harmful besides being one of the major sources of arthritis in our bodies because of its pro-inflammatory characteristic. It also suppresses acetylcholine, which is an essential neurotransmitter in our brains and in our nervous systems, and is an essential neurotransmitter that communicates between the nervous system and our immune systems and our muscle systems. So when you eat nightshade family plants, if you are sensitive in particular to the chemicals that are in them, they have a negative impact in that way. And the idea is if you could get a fermentation going that can break those things down, then your body can still eat those things and not be harmed by them.
Yeah, it's solid. Yeah, it's solid. Great. So, okay. So it's 8 o'clock. Do people want a little break, or you want me to keep going? Keep going? Okay. So, let's talk about probiotics. Okay, so the few different terms that you'll kind of hear me throwing around in terms of the probiotics. So one is microbiota, and that just basically means all the beneficial bacteria or gut bugs that are in the body. Another is probiotics. It's basically the same, although microbiota can include some gut bugs that may not be beneficial, and probiotics are specific to the beneficial bacteria. Those are primarily the ones I use. Sometimes you'll hear me talk about the microbiome, that's pretty rare. The microbiome is basically the genome of these different microbiota. So, kind of like I was saying before, how the bacteria can adapt much more quickly than we can adapt. Their DNA adapts more quickly so that they can digest things that we can't digest. Then that's pretty much their microbiome that's changing. So I won't be using that terminology too much. So I want to talk a little bit about probiotic supplements, because I feel like this can be useful information for people, and not everybody has this information. And so in terms of probiotic supplements, the really three things that you want to be looking for are their bile salt and gastric acid stability. So are they going to make it to the location that you want them to make it to? Their ability to adhere to the intestinal mucosa. So you want them to stay in the gut, basically. Like when you eat those probiotics, you want them to be able to adhere to the intestinal mucosa of the body. And then the last one is if they're able to adhere, then they're able to colonize. So if they're actually colonizing in the body, then that's really what we want. We want a proliferation of a diversity of all these beneficial bacteria in the gut. And so in terms of probiotics, the way that you can determine if those different probiotics that you're taking, the supplements primarily, are doing this, because most of the food-based ones tend to do this naturally, because they're food-based, and so it's kind of like survival of the fittest. They tend to do that. Is based on strains. So how many people are familiar with the strains of probiotics that they're taking? Okay, you guys are ahead of the curve. So most people are familiar with the genus and the species of the different probiotics that they're taking. So lactobacillus is a common one that most people will take as a probiotic supplement. And so in terms of this, let's see, I just want to make sure that I get this right. So like Lactobacillus acidophilus. So Lactobacillus is the genus, and Acidophilus is the species. So when you buy a probiotic supplement, oftentimes that's what it'll say, right? Lactobacillus acidophilus. And you'll be like, right on, that's what I need. So the thing it rarely mentions the strain. So one of the strains of Lactobacillus acidophilus is LA5. It's one of the many strains. But very few probiotic supplements actually mention what the strain is of the supplement. So the best analogy that I've heard for this is in terms of dogs. So the genus name of dogs is Canis, and the species name is Familiaris, right? So that's the entire dog species and genus. But then, underneath that, you have a lot of different types of dogs, right? You have Newfoundlands, you have Chihuahuas, you've got a lot of different types of dogs, which would all be considered different strains of dogs. Some dogs are sheep herding dogs. Some dogs are just cute. Some dogs are loyal. Some dogs are better for fighting, right? Every dog strain, breed, is a little bit different. So probiotics are the same way. Just because you have Lactobacillus acidophilus, if you don't know what the strain is, you don't actually know the characteristics of that particular probiotic that you're taking. And so even though people are telling you probiotics are great, well, they're not great unless you have this right strain, and unless you have a strain that's actually going to do what it is that you need it to do in your digestive system.
Well, these are just treating symptoms, and is what you're saying? Different symptoms, they could, how far, trying to get what you're saying.
Yeah, so basically what I'm saying is that the way that probiotics are marketed, they just talk about the genus and the species, and they don't actually talk about the strain specificity. And in order for probiotics to work, you have to know what strain it is. And the reason you have to know the strain is because certain strains are resilient to your bile salts and your gastric acid. Certain strains do colonize. Certain strains do adhere to the mucosal lining of the intestinal wall. There's a lot of other strains in the Lactobacillus acidophilus genus and species that don't do any of those things, and so taking those strains actually provides you no benefit because you're basically breaking it down in your stomach before it ever gets to where it needs to.
Yep, they sell those.
Oh, they love to sell those cheaply. Yeah, they love to sell those. So if you're taking probiotics, be aware of the strain that you're taking. If you can't find information about the strain that you're taking, then it's likely that the manufacturer of the probiotics doesn't know what strains are. Otherwise, they probably would include that information.
So how do we know like which specific strains we need? Like,
So
what we're looking
the
for?
table in here has some of that information.
Oh, okay.
A lot of that information you can find online. Specifically, this guy, Jason Halrelak at Illuminating Natural Medicine, he's done a lot of research, on strain specificity. But this table is pretty good. So this is food sources of beneficial strains and their effects. So it goes through, I'll just do this top one, because it's pretty easy. So Bifidobacterium lactis BB12, or Bifidobacteria animalis species lactis BB12. So the strain is basically the BB12. And so this strain, you can find that in Nancy's Organic Probiotic Greek Yogurt. You can also find this in Centrum. This guy, unfortunately, he's in Australia, and so he doesn't have the best data on supplement sources. He really mostly looks at the mainstream supplement suppliers. So you may be able to find other supplements that have this. So indications, all of these have been heavily researched with randomized controlled styles, or controlled, you know what I'm saying, can't think of it. And randomized controlled tests, and then also meta-analysis to be effective if you've ever taken antibiotics, if you have atopic eczema, if you have chronic fatigue, if you have colitis, if you have constipation, if you have chronic infections, if you have intestinal dysbiosis, postpartum obesity. It actually prevents cavities, and it prevents traveler's diarrhea. It's not going to take your cavities away, sorry. Yeah?
I have a question. Do you ever recommend making your own yogurt? Is that fair or not, depending on?
Yeah, I highly recommend milk kefir. I don't actually recommend making yogurt, although if you were using the Nancy's Organic Probiotic Greek Yogurt as your starter in order to make your yogurt, I think that would be really useful. The reason that I don't tend to recommend making yogurt is because most of the commercial yogurts that are out there on the market are basically using a genus and species and strain that has no real therapeutic benefits. They have chosen the species and strain, and I forget the exact name, but it's Bulgaris. It was developed in Bulgaria that sours milk really quickly to create yogurt, but actually there's very little therapeutic benefit to many of the commercial yogurts that are out.
So basically sorry.
Clarine's asking about making her own, which would eat the lactose.
Because you would buy your packet of your,
Yeah.
not starter, but.
Oh, I see. Okay.
CNC,
Yeah.
And
So it would depend on that packet of starter and what strains are in that packet of starter. So basically what I'm saying is the initial strain that they used to make yogurt had that initial thing that packet is derived from, the first guy to make yogurt in Bulgaria, that all other yogurt has been derived from over centuries. That strain that he used has no therapeutic benefit. So it's highly unlikely that the packet that you're getting, or if you buy some other type of commercial yogurt, if it's not the Nancy's Organic Probiotic Greek yogurt, that you're not getting any therapeutic strains. You're getting lots of Lactobacillus acidophilus, but you're getting specific strains that are not going to make it through the gastric tract, they're not going to make it through the bile salts, they're not going to colonize, and they're not going to adhere to the intestinal wall. So the benefits that you're getting from yogurt are probably very minimal unless you're making it, because you could just buy milk and put a half a cup of Nancy's yogurt in it. So that's how I would do it. Yes.
Does it matter? The reason I ask is I mentioned my daughter has diabetes,
Yeah,
and she's on a specific carbohydrate diet, SCD diet.
okay,
So the recommendation is to make your own yogurt.
yeah,
But most commercial yogurts are only processed up to 8 hours, whereas on the SCD diet, it has to be twice as long or something like
Right.
that because of the sugars.
yeah.
It eats the sugar,
Yeah.
it eats them.
So do you know anything about that for the rest of the time? Because I know if you're looking at Nancy's, it's commercial,
It's commercial.
so it isn't really as processed as long.
Yeah, yeah, so what I would do is make your own yogurt, but I would use, instead of the starter pack, I would use the Nancy's yogurt.
And then the other question was, I noticed you had colitis in 2 places.
Yes,
And they're both Nancy's.
oh, right,
So is there a difference between the two?
there is. Yeah, so I have it with both the Bifidobacterium lactis, the BB12, and the Lactobacillus acidophilus LA5. So both of those specific strains of those type are useful for colitis, based on the research that was done.
Quick question. Rosacea,
Mm-hmm.
it's the type that's coming up here. I know someone that had it's getting pretty bad.
Yeah.
We've been trying to do like some essential oils, milk and oregano,
Mm-hmm.
but not really having any
Yeah.
luck with that. And so now, and I know, I've found out that it has to do with digestion,
Totally.
leaky gut, probably
Definitely.
from too much gluten, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But what would be a good strain to hit? I mean, because I see this atopic eczema.
Yeah.
Is that relatable?
It's relatable. There's no, in terms of the research that I've come across, there's no specific strain for rosacea.
Uh-huh.
But like you said, because of the leaky gut and because of the connection to the digestive system, improvement of the probiotic and microbiota is going to have benefit.
Okay.
And so, in that case, I mean, there really are not a lot of food sources to choose from, right?
Right.
You've got Nancy's, you've got Yakult, which they sell at Walmart, ugh, and you've got Good Belly. So, I mean, it doesn't hurt to try, right?
Right.
And just like with the fermented
And with
vegetables.
what we're gonna be doing with the fermented vegetables would be
Yeah.
helpful
Yeah,
also.
yeah, and it's the same thing, like, it's that investment thing where it
Right.
takes about 30 days.
30 days.
With the yogurts, it takes about a half cup. You need a half cup every day for 30 days in order to kind of spin the wheel the other direction. And some people are dairy intolerant, and dairy is mucus promoting. I mean, it increases the amount of mucus, so it's almost like you're doing the dairy, you're getting the antibiotics, it's improving something, and then you have to do something to get rid of the mucus that the dairy is creating. And so, it's like all healthcare, it's more complicated than one thing. But yeah, I think it's worth a try.
So coconut yogurt is useless as far as probiotics go?
It depends on what, so
So I don't.
store-bought coconut yogurt, or you make your own coconut yogurt?
No, I usually buy it,
You buy it.
yeah.
Yeah, the most likely, they're gonna use the cheapest strain possible in order to inoculate it with a syringe to put probiotics in there to be able to sell it. So unless the coconut yogurt manufacturer can give you the strain specificity that they use, and you can find research that shows that that strain is actually one of those that fills those 3 requirements, it's unlikely. What I do is I have chosen like this Ganestra HMF powder, not that I have IBS, but I've chosen one of these supplement sources, and I'll open the capsule and pour it into canned coconut milk and let that ferment the canned coconut milk until I have coconut yogurt, and then I'll eat that. And so depending on the specific amount of probiotics that are in there, it usually takes 2 to 3 capsules. So that's a way that you can make your own probiotic-rich coconut yogurt with the strain that you actually want in there.
Into a can of coconut milk?
Oh, you
or
want to
a
open the can and put it in a jar.
Are you saying in the can, that product, just a can of coconut milk, not like soda?
Yeah, the canned one tends to work better because it has much more fat. It just tends to be more of a yogurt consistency when you're finished. You could do it with like the So Delicious or whatever, but it's not gonna have the yogurt consistency. And the times that I've done it, it kind of separates a little bit because that's like, it's like coconut meat blended with water and a bunch of things to hold it together. And so when I've done it, it's separated and done weird things. So I find that the canned coconut works best. And I think it's the Native Forest brand.
Can you say that again?
I think it's Native Forest.
Native Forest. Do you have to treat it like when you're making your own yogurt, you have to heat it to a certain temperature?
No.
Cool it, just add it to room temperature cans?
Yeah.
And how long does it take?
Depends on the temperature in the room, but at 72 degrees, it usually takes 2 to 3 days. Yeah, and the Native Forest I like best because they ensure that they have a BPA-free can. So, and you'll see it, like when you open it, there is like a little lining, so it's not straight aluminum on the coconut milk, and the lining that they use is a BPA-free plastic. So it's more expensive, but I find it's like, if you're gonna do the coconut yogurt, that's the brand.
Is it co-op?
Yeah, co-op has it.
Okay.
Let's go to her real quick.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Do you have those 3 strains that you feel are beneficial listed in that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I've got more than 3. I've got a bunch of different ones.
And are you saying that Nancy's yogurt contains some of these beneficial
Yeah,
strains?
the Nancy's Organic Probiotic Greek Yogurt contains some, and then the Nancy's Organic Whole Milk Yogurt does contain the Acidophilus LA5.
It's in there.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't catch the capsules. What kind of capsules do you put into it? Well, I know
You choose capsules that have the strain that you want. And so
Okay.
even though the supplement source list here is relatively brief, like I haven't listed as many supplement sources as I would like because I couldn't find that information. But I'm still searching for it because I think it's really useful information. I would choose one of these strains based on the indications and then find a supplement source that has that strain and use that. Yeah.
All right, now I'd like to find out, so, if we take a probiotic that has a capsule or something and we get a lot of strains in there, some we don't need, are they, working against our system, or they just?
Highly unlikely. Yeah. Highly
That's
unlikely.
what I figured, so it can't hurt us really.
Yeah.
It's not, it's not.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I mean, from the Ayurvedic perspective, there is a possibility that you could get a pitta imbalance where you could start to get looser stools. You could start to get some like acidity, hot flashes, like start to feel more hot if you were getting the wrong strain. But it's, I mean, the thing about probiotics is that even though we're working towards colonization, they're constantly being born and dying. It's a constant process. And so because of that, it's a very dynamic process. And so it's not like you get like a certain amount and then you just stay at that amount. It's, you get some, and you lose some, you get some, and you lose. And so because of that dynamism, it's extremely unlikely that if you're eating the wrong strain or one that doesn't do exactly what you want it to do, that it's then going to cause harm.
I think one of the things worthy of mention is that people who make products are going to use the kind of bacterial strains that they use primarily to produce a consistent product. They're not going to be necessarily producing something that's going to produce a specific, consistent result in a lot of different human bodies, because human bodies respond differently. Recent research was done, for instance, on twins, many of them, examining what bacteria was in their guts and how those different bacteria related to their metabolic conditions. And they found that the type of bacteria is very significant as to the kind of metabolic and health situations in a particular body. This, of course, is one of the reasons why certain cultures, not cultures of bacteria, but cultures of human beings, have particular cultures of beneficial bacteria that they have preserved over generations and passed them down from one generation to another and teach people how to reproduce the results that they get from them because they have certain beneficial health properties.
Yeah, this is a very interesting field of research. So I think it's BioFrontiers Institute, which is an arm of the University of Colorado. You can send them a stool sample and they will tell you who is colonizing your intestinal tract. And then they will compare your results to the standard American diet, and they'll compare your results to traditional food cultures that tend to have, on average, 10 times as much diversity as we do. And so and they can basically see, like, oh, you started antibiotics at a young age, or they can really kind of see what's going on, which is very interesting for me as an Ayurvedic practitioner, because I'm constantly asking people about their poop. And so this lab in Boulder is doing this research based on stool samples, but from a bacterial perspective, that's basically why I ask people about their poop all the time, because that tells me like how the colonization is in their intestinal tract, and whether that colonization is going to provide the most benefit for them as well. You know, and one other thing that you reminded me of that I wanted to mention is that we're talking about food, but there's these beneficial bacteria everywhere. And so they have found that people who spend more time outdoors tend to have higher diversity of beneficial bacteria, because there are specific bacteria that are in your gastrointestinal tract. There's tons of bacteria all over your skin. I mean, 10 to 1, right? They outnumber us significantly. So they're everywhere. And so people who spend more time in natural bodies of water, spend more time outside, spend more time with their hands in the dirt, tend to have much higher diversity of these things. And so, you know, Ayurveda's been saying this for thousands of years, like spend some time outside, you know, walk barefoot in your backyard, like do all this stuff to connect with nature. And now, you know, microbiology is starting to affirm the actual scientific reason that that's so beneficial, because that colonization happens from doing all those things. And that's why this is such a hot topic right now, is because our environment has become extremely sterile here in the U.S.
Antibacterial soap.
Yeah, antibacterial soap is everywhere. You know, and so most of us are spending more time in offices, spending less time outside. So, you know, a whole host of reasons, the way that our food is grown, all the different processing that goes into making all the different foods. I mean, so there's a lot of reasons that this is such a timely subject, because there's just an over-sterilization of our entire culture in a way, and that's affecting the internal microbiota in that culture as well.
Could you review what you said just a few minutes ago about hot flashes? Was it about the people?
Oh yeah, it was, you know, she was mentioning how would you know if you actually got too many probiotics, or if you got too many of the wrong strain of probiotics. And I was saying, from the Ayurvedic perspective, the indication is this excess of pitta. And digestion and transformation, pitta dosha is basically the fire element, and so it relates to excess heat within the system. And so there is a possibility that when you have too much heat in the system, that one of the reasons could be the wrong strain of bacteria. The other side of that is, you know, here I'm primarily talking about the beneficial strains, but that could be that you have too much of the non-beneficial strains of bacteria, and that's why you have this pitta, have this excess heat, and have, you know, pitta-like symptoms. And,
If you had a tendency towards heat
Yeah.
in the body, then kombucha would be a good thing to do every day.
Yeah, kombucha, the interesting thing about kombucha is that it does have a lot of beneficial bacteria in it, but the dosage that most people take is way too high. And so that they do tend to get some pitta aggravation. And so like I've been talking about with the kraut, basically 3 to 6 tablespoons a day for 30 days. With kombucha, you don't have more than 4 ounces a day. 4 ounces a day is a therapeutic dose of kombucha. So if you're drinking more than 4 ounces a day of kombucha, there is a possibility that you could cause some sort of pitta aggravation. The other thing with kombucha is it depends on the type of kombucha that you're making yourself or drinking, and the ones that tend to be best are the ones that are based on tea, or the coconut ones are pretty good too, but the fruit-based ones, then that increases this pitta aggravation exponentially.
Can you, a person I know makes it, is it okay with decaf tea? Because
Yeah. Totally. When they go yeah.
So, you're saying the pitta, that might aggravate the heat. So I'm in the opposite, I'm Boston and cold.
Mm-hmm.
So should I be drinking more than a quarter, quarter of 4 ounces of the kombucha in a day? Right now I'm not drinking.
No, you don't. As far as kombucha goes, 4 ounces is a therapeutic dose. So
Whether a person is cold inside.
yeah. You don't need any more than that. It's like diminishing returns once you drink any more than that, where it's actually providing you any therapy.
It has dairy or inulin or something in it, doesn't it?